Vicki Brooke, and I'm here to talk today about customized employment and job site training. I'm with Virginia Commonwealth University, and this is part of a series with University of Illinois Principal Investigator Dr. Dave Strausser on customized employment. So this is my section on job site training, which I love the best. So let's begin by talking about job site training. So today we'll probably be together for the next 30 minutes. We're going to talk about job duty analysis, natural cues, natural supports, performing for performance, moving, kind of identifying where we're at and how we're going to move to performance, task analysis, probe data, least intrusive prompts, and fading. So we got a lot to cover. Let's get going. We're going to begin by doing a pop quiz. I just saw everybody's eyes roll. Okay. When does job site training begin? On the first day of work or before the first day of work? So if you said before the first day of work, you're right, because there's a lot into analyzing that work environment to determine whether it's a good match. And so right from the beginning, you're thinking about instruction. If somebody cannot count, they cannot do a job where they have to stock supplies in a certain number. True or false? If you said false, you're right. Many of us use compensatory strategies where an individual doesn't have to count, but it's really the employment specialist figuring out what's a good strategy to support that individual. And then the last question is, the most successful employment specialist plans for fading once the individual has learned the job task. Actually, that's false. So if you wait until after other job tasks, you'll probably have a very difficult time fading. So we'll talk about that before we end our session today. So as we said, job site training, when does it begin? Really, before the person begins to work, we're going to analyze the job. We're going to organize a daily routine. We're going to plan teaching strategies. And if the businesses could benefit from a disability awareness training, we'll offer that. That's sort of really how the relationship starts developing. That you're providing something, you're not charging for it, but it helps everybody kind of make a warm and accepting environment. So, what is a job duty analysis? So you're going to look at and you're going to stand in a work environment and observe. What does a worker do? What are the duties? What are the tasks? You're going to write them down. How do they do it? What are their methods? Do they use individual tools or specific techniques? Do they have tricks of the trade? What are the products? What are the services? And then what kind of qualifications do you have to have? What are the physical demands of that particular task? So you want to have a really good sense of that. In some cases, you may actually kind of work the task yourself to get a real sense of it. So let's talk a little bit more about job duty analysis. I'm going to interview the supervisor. I'm going to observe coworkers. So coworkers may have tricks of the trade, but maybe the supervisor really doesn't want them doing that. So we want to make sure whatever job duty analysis we develop, we're going to check it with the supervisor. Identify the skills that need to be performed. Again, the machinery. We're going to look at an efficient procedure. So if somebody has to do filing and the filing cabinet is on the other side of the room, that may not be very efficient. We want to look at reducing movement. If our person may have production issues, thinking about that on the front end will go a long ways. So looking at that, maybe moving the filing cabinet, talking to the supervisor about that. And then once we've developed it, we're going to review our results with the supervisor, the manager. So let's look at a very specific example for data entry for a computer operator. So they have to answer the phone, they have to code data, they have to enter the data, they have to go through a process for verifying accuracy and completeness. They then investigate discrepancies, they file their reconciliations, and then they keep files. So that is usually what an employer would say, that's your job. You come in here at a certain time and you end at a certain time, but it's going to be really up to the employment specialist to figure out what is the best sequence. So for this individual, we figured out that if they work from 7 a.m. to 9:30, they would be able to code all the data. That would be working with the job site's production rate, but we analyzed it long enough to know that they would get done by 9:30. Then we had additional hour and a half for entering the data, an hour to verify data. Then we want to make sure that their lunch break is at the same time coworkers are. So we don't want to set up a different lunch break for our individual that we're supporting versus their coworkers, because we want them to get to know everybody. Then they're back to work at 1:30, and they're identifying discrepancies. Then they're going to take all the messages off the phone in a 30-minute period, collate and file all the paperwork. So this really becomes your first task analysis. So for some individuals, they won't need the task broken down any further than this. Other individuals with more significant disabilities will. So this is your first kind of official piece of job site analysis for the job site for that individual. The nice thing is, even in long-term supports, heavens forbid something happens to me as the instructor, another instructor could pick up this job duty analysis and know that Martha should be entering data at 9:30 in the morning. If she's not, what is happening? What's going wrong? And analyze it from that standpoint. This is really helpful once you're into long-term supports, but we'll talk about that in another session. Here's another example, a communication that took place with Alyssa, who's talking to Kristen and saying that they really appreciated the initial meeting. And here's the list of tasks that she took down as what they'll be doing on Thursday at 8:15 when they arrive at 9 o'clock. So she's verifying that she wrote everything down correctly. Then Alyssa developed a morning and afternoon work schedule, and then also developed secondary tasks. So should the workload be really low in the morning, they have other tasks that they could do for downtime. And the same is true for the afternoons. So for a lot of our folks, they need to be able to identify work that they need to fill out their schedules rather than standing around. And this is at a hospital. So yeah, it's a little different than the other one, but she has it broken down in morning and afternoon tasks. So moving to performance, we're going to look at natural cues, natural supports. Sometimes I've seen a lot of things out in the community that are really unnatural supports being called natural supports. Modification to the work environment, compensatory strategies, direct instruction, and then job redesign. So let's look at this. What's a natural cue? Well, it's something you can see, hear, touch, or smell. So if our employee does not attend to a cue that's in the environment, we may have to add something in that environment to get them to attend to that natural cue. And then once they are attending to it, then we'll fade the cue. So what am I talking about? Think about a copier. There are just a ton of natural cues to a copier. There's the light that flashes. There could be a dinging or a bell once the copying is completed. There are usually labels on the front of the machine that says standardized paper or legal size paper. And there's that whole pad right on the top of that copier that has a number pad, and there's picture pads on the side there. So there's lots of stuff to pay attention to on a copier, to pay attention to for natural cues. So teaching natural cues, if you run out of a paper, if they're not filling up the paper container, then you're going to have to teach that. A doorbell rings, you answer the doorbell. For somebody working in a hotel, distinguishing between shower caps and shoe shine cloths when they have the same packaging. you have to figure out a natural cue that's there to get them to attend to that. And if there's a gold line on a coffee mug, then that's how far you're going to fill up the coffee in that mug. And so you have to introduce the gold line as the natural cue. And you're going to work that right into your instruction. It's really important for instructors to remember that they too can become part of the natural cue. So really figuring out where your body is and that you're not identifying information for the individual. So you would want to stand behind the individual vacuuming. Here's another example of natural cues and how you add them and then fade that extra cue that you're getting the individual to attend to. And here's a coffee stand where you have cinnamon and vanilla that you can put into your coffee. So if our individual's having a hard time attending to the fact that it's half full or half empty, we would add like some black tape on the cinnamon shakers. Now, of course, you wouldn't do this without asking the employer, but you add in that little line on the shaker, and then you're going to reduce the size of it, and then eventually the individual is starting to attend to what is half empty, and you could remove it altogether. Or if cinnamon is written out on the shaker, just attending to the letter. When it's below the last N, then you need to fill it up. So really looking at that, if they're not attending to the N, you can circle it. You could again enter the cue right next to the N. And then again, in the same case, you would remove it once the individual was attending to it. So let's take a minute and talk about natural supports. So it really is a decision. It's not just that, the natural supports are there in the work environment and you're going to use them, but it must be the employee's decision. Rather than having a coworker who's right there, help them log in on the computer to log in for their time. Maybe if I provided instruction, the individual would learn it within maybe a week. Then they wouldn't have to be dependent upon a coworker to log them in. So I think lots of times we turn to natural supports that seem like, well, that's a good idea. A coworker could just do that for him. But your job is to help them become part of that work environment. And if they don't need that coworker support, let's not use that. Let's provide provide instruction for that. Examples of other natural supports, maybe a coworker mentor. Maybe somebody's going to help them really kind of take lunches together and kind of be part of that social fabric at the job site. Maybe it's a supervisor who's going to start monitoring their work performance, maybe during orientation or beyond, or an employee assistance program, which could be another natural support. So here's some questions to ask in identifying setting up natural supports that you really should kind of walk through with yourself and the new employee. Has the team really included the individual, discussed the support needs? Did you develop a support plan? Are coworkers available to consistently provide feedback and instruction? If they're not, then maybe it's not a good strategy. Is there stability in the staff scheduling so the employee can rely on either a specific coworker or maybe two coworkers? Could the employment specialist or coworkers assist the worker with the disability in responding to the natural occurring supports or cues in the workplace? How quickly could this be accomplished? Can the employee learn from using a compensatory strategy or a self-management strategy rather than having a natural support? So these are some questions you want to really ask yourself and the individual before relying on a natural support. I think where they're really valuable is to help with social integration, using as a mentor if somebody reaches out, that really becomes a really helpful strategy that an employment specialist can't do. So imitation is the serious form of flattery, I guess we say. When the employment specialist is on the job site, people are watching you. The coworkers are watching you. They're watching how you talk, how you interact with the new employee. So you want to have really high standards. Encourage the coworkers to direct their question to the new employee. So they may naturally come to you and ask you a question, but you could just turn your head and say, I don't know, Martha, what do you think? Teach employees to ask questions of the coworker rather than just a job coach. So rather than you being the job coach being the fountain of all information, you can turn to a coworker and say, well, what should you do in this case? And then another technique can be really helpful is having the new employee, the individual you're supporting, to learn the names of their coworkers, which is, that you feel more included. So let's talk about writing a task analysis. Each step of the task analysis should be an observable behavior. You write a step with adequate detail, so one behavior is one step. So this is going to be different than maybe how you learned in a pre-service program. This has to be really functional for you in a job site. The task analysis will be ordered in a sequence from beginning to end. And I want each step to be a verbal cue. I want to be able to pull the task analysis up and look down and to say the same verbal cue every time I'm presenting the task. I'm going to build in natural cues and compensatory strategies. Again, I'm going to look at efficiency. I'm going to eliminate discrepancy. For example, cleaning mirrors. I'm not going to have somebody stand back and see whether it's clean or dirty. I'm going to have our individual just do the same procedure for cleaning a mirror whenever they're presented with that task. And then you're going to test the task analysis before using it for instruction. So here's an activity. Think about filling up a glass of water. I'm going to pick up the cup. Then I'm going to pick up the pitcher. Then I'm going to pour the glass of water. I'm going to put down the cup and put down the pitcher. So you could have a lot more steps in there, but these 5 steps really get you from picking up the cup to putting down the pitcher and completing the task. So how do I know if somebody's learning the task? So I'm going to use the single opportunity probe data. I'm going to move to the correct area. I'm going to give the instructional cue to begin the task. So it is like, fill the glasses with water. I'm going to stand beside or behind the individual. Why? Because a little while ago, we talked about how you don't want to become part of the instruction. I'm going to take unobtrusive observation. So here's the hardest part for employment specialists. We're not going to do any prompting. We're not going to do any reinforcement. I'm going to wait for 5 seconds for a response. So I'm going to give them an opportunity to do it. Sometimes I think we move so fast and we're so concerned about the next task that we don't give the individual an opportunity to do it independently. And for each step, I'm going to put down a mark if they got it. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. They picked up the cup, they get a plus. If they don't initiate it, then I'm just going to put a minus, and then I'm going to begin instruction right on that step. So and we look at, they picked up the cup, they picked up the pitcher, but they did not pour the glass of water. Then we just put minus, minus, minus all the way down and begin instruction on that 3rd step. Okay. So now let's talk about the definition of least intrusive. It's we're going to use that as the strategy that we talked about earlier on to provide instruction. It's a behavioral training technique in which either a verbal, model, or physical prompt is provided to the learner on each sequential step of the task when it's not performed correctly. The method allows for the completion of the task from the beginning to the end, regardless of the amount of assistance that's needed. So verbal prompt could look like pick up the cup, or it could be an indirect verbal prompt, what's next? If you're pointing to the cup, that's a gestural prompt. If you pick up the cup like this, then it's modeling prompt, and you would record an M. And it's physical assistance, partial or physical. Either I'm going to guide the individual, or if I'm doing hand over hand assistance, that's full physical assistance. Just remember, the reason you wouldn't begin with physical assistance is that you wouldn't want to provide that much of assistance if the individual didn't need it. So I would want to begin with the verbal prompt and only provide physical assistance if that's what it took in order for them to complete that step. So again, you're standing behind or beside the individual. You're going to provide the cue, fill up the glass of water. You're going to wait 3 to 5 seconds to give them an opportunity to perform it. 1001, 1002, 1003. They picked up the cup, plus. Thousand one, 1002, 1003. Pick up the pitcher. That's a verbal prompt. If they didn't do it, 1001, 1002, 1003. I would point to the cup, and as they picked it up, I would reinforce them. Good job picking up. If they still couldn't do it, 1001, 1002, 1003, I would model for them. Pick up the cup like this. If they did it, of course, we'd reinforce. If they didn't, then I might move their hand toward the cup and say, pick up the cup again. So I would pair the verbal prompt with the physical assistance. And if they did it, we would reinforce it. And on that step for picking up the cup, I would put a P for physical assistance, because that's what it took in order for them to pick up the cup. And that was true all the way up the hierarchy. If they got it with modeling, I would put an M. If they got it with gestural prompt, when I pointed to the cup and they got it, then I'd put a G. So I'd know exactly how much assistance it took for them to get through that sequence of steps for filling up the glasses with water. So let's look at this. The first time we did probe data, they picked up the cup and they picked up the pitcher, but then they needed assistance for pouring water, putting down the cup, and putting down the pitcher. We provided instruction all week long, and we took probe data again at the end of the week, and we got the same results. They're independent with the first 2 steps, and they needed assistance for the following 3 steps. But in between there, we also recorded the type of instruction that they received in order to accomplish that step. So looking at these data, could you say, is learning occurring? Well, clearly the probe data says there hasn't been any change. And that probe data is in the first column and the last column. But with the middle 3 columns, you could see the very last time that we provided instruction and recorded data, they had been receiving modeling prompts for 3 sessions for pouring the water, putting down the cup, but putting down the pitcher, they got that step with a gestural prompt. I'm guessing with so many things going on in the job site, you really wouldn't have a sense of whether learning was occurring. So you want to keep data for lots of reasons, but really for you as the instructor to know exactly where the individual's at with instruction. You know, if I could just say another thing about job site training, that lots of times hear people say, you know, providing instruction to people on the job site is too obtrusive. It can be if you're not doing a good job doing it. So you want to think about how you can blend into that work environment and provide instruction in a way that that you are standing right next to the individual and your prompts are very subtle and it's not standing out to everybody. Of course, you wouldn't stand there like with a clipboard and a stopwatch. So, you know, you want to fade into the environment but be able to provide some really clean instruction. So once the individual is doing well and they're maybe doing, I don't know, 90% of the tasks themselves with maybe just a few verbal prompts, you're going to be able to kind of work on that fourth bullet down, proximal fading. So I may just step away from that immediate work environment. So initially I might be providing instruction right next to the individual. And then as they start performing the task, I may step back 4 feet, then maybe 7 feet. And then maybe I'm doing unobtrusive observation. And then maybe I am leaving that immediate work area and sitting out of the break room and then popping back in. So the fading begins right from the very beginning. You'd want to start discussing the fading with the supervisor. Of course, making sure that the employee who may be used to you being right with them in their work environment, where you're going to go, what you're going to do, how I'm going to stay right here on the job site, but I'm going to go have a cup of coffee. Make sure they have a phone number to reach you. You know, that you wouldn't just fade from the job site without giving people all that information, and you wouldn't fade for a whole day if they're working full time. So maybe first fading beginning with 1 or 2 hours, and then you just gradually increase it as the individual's performance continues to maintain itself. If an individual is having problems remembering their routine, or that seems to be the area where you're providing a lot of your instruction, you want to develop some compensatory strategies. Like, here's a task list that the person could be very independent and just checking off. They know how to clean the bathrooms, and they know how to vacuum. So really now it's just remembering the sequence and what they do next. So you could develop a task list for them. For somebody who doesn't read, you can have the same kind of task list, but maybe you're going to use pictures. And this is something that they can self-manage, and you could pop in and check to see whether they've done all those tasks. To me, the compensatory strategies is really could be the creative part of your job, where somebody's having difficulty with a task and coming up with ideas to kind of promote their independence. You don't want to be on the job site longer or more intensively than you really need to be, or an individual becomes dependent upon you on the job site, or the supervisors become dependent upon the job coach. So you want to be able to provide some clean, systematic instruction, and then fade from the job site as soon as the individual can become independent and confident in their job. Really, that creativity is really just, it's boundless. The employment specialist, just whatever you can think of and works in that environment. So I've really enjoyed talking to you about customized employment and job site training and support. There could be session 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but for today, we'll just end it here. And the next session will be on long-term support. So thank you very much.